back in 1425. That Leonardo image was 1473. You can barely see it here, but this is Masaccio. He died at a very young age, in his late 20s, and he was just the first to get the perspective geometrically correct, exactly. And you can still see the closed-in cavern. Everything is very sunken in here. But people are becoming fascinated with geometry and with painting things in terms of geometrical triangles, because the works of Euclid have been translated, and everyone's very fascinated with the application. You might say that perspective is, in a certain sense, the fusion of Euclidean geometry with painting. This is one of my favorite images. It's a 16th century German woodcut that shows Faustian man breaking out of the cavern, going out into the cosmos, sticking his head out there. And this is the closed-in night sky world, sun and moon and planetary bodies. Out here are these spheres, but we've got this sort of mechanical clockwork motif. So we're moving on out of the anima mundi into the clockwork god here. And this, by the way, is exactly what we just saw on the Truman Show. Does everybody remember the Truman Show? The bound-in, closed world. In a certain sense, and the very end of the Truman Show is exactly this. He punches his hole through the stage set there. And in a certain way, the book I'm working on now is about how cinema is recapturing these old images from the past, scaling them down, miniaturizing them, and snaking them in subliminally so that nobody knows, unless you've studied these images, what they're looking at. But I'm carefully tracking these things, and that's the second book that I'm working on. And the thing about that is that with respect to the Truman Show, the idea is now in that film, with electronic culture, there's a danger of creating a reality that is completely artificial, and is such that, and particularly with respect to our children, they don't know that the world that the media is beaming at them is a construct. They mistake it for reality. How many times do we hear news reports of things where the facts are blatantly just wrong, or they're sensationalized for dramatic effect? The media has this sense where the primary thing is entertainment. Facts are secondary. Facts belong to the Gutenberg world of the past, not to the present world, where reality is structured now as entertainment, and that's the primary factor, warping everything else to fit that. So the thing about the Truman Show is this idea of breaking out of the sort of cognitive imprints that have been imprinted onto you as you're growing up within a totally artificial, media-generated cavern womb environment. And the need to break out of that. Marshall McLuhan was the first. He was another theoretician of the evolution of consciousness back in the 60s, and he was the first to begin to see what was happening in terms of, he was examining advertising and examining all the popular culture, cartoons and comic books, and he said, look, this stuff will control you. This stuff will imprison you. It will have as deterministic an effect on your life as the stars did for the ancients, unless you break out of it. The ancients had a way of breaking out of astrological determinism through initiation into the mystery cults. We don't have that anymore. The way in which you break out of this simulacrum, this cavern-generated media world, is through studying it, through gaining control over it, by questioning everything that comes at you. You have to question everything, and you can never assume that the simulacrum that's coming through the electronic belt is something that's real. In most cases, it's usually a construct. So that's sort of that motif. Now with respect to, here's a kind of interesting, another one of my favorite images here is, well, these are all my favorite images, that's why I've selected them to begin. Is Durer's perspective drawing, 1525, showing you how this, how perspective works. And here's the artist, and what it is he's laying a grid. Anyone who's taken art class knows this. They have you draw this grid, and you have to duplicate the grid mathematically, and then draw, he would be drawing in this grid, this knee would have to correspond right in here. So it has to do the perspectival structure of consciousness, and Gebser's perspectival consciousness structure is essentially the same as what Spengler was talking about by the Faustian infinite space thrust. And like Gebser characterizes it as perspectival, is this laying of a grid over reality. The perspectival consciousness structure slices everything up, segments it, analyzes everything. That has been our obsession, is to analyze everything into tiny, discrete little units. And that is the real reason why we picked up the atomist hypothesis in the 17th century, because it was consistent now with that new analytical feeling for slicing things apart. And indeed, as Descartes says in his Discourse on Method, my method is, in fact, analysis first, then synthesis. And by analysis, what I mean to say is that whatever problem we want to solve, we present it, and we analyze it to its simplest component parts, and then we can build it back up again and synthesize it, reconstruct it from those component parts. The assumption is that everything can be disassembled as though it were a machine, as though we were just sort of a mechanic taking apart a machine, cleaning the parts, and putting them back together. But reality now is thought to be that way. The perspectival consciousness structure overlays this grid onto reality on the assumption that it will conform to this mechanistic model that's being imposed upon it. So everything, including nature, the human body is thought to be a machine in this sense. If we just sort of slice it open, if there's something wrong with you, it must be this organ or that organ. If we replace that organ, like a mechanic replacing the carburetor, then the machine should function. So there's no respect for the whole, how the whole organism functions, the way Steiner had it with this idea of this etheric body organizing everything. If something's wrong with the etheric body, then something will be wrong with the entire organism. So there's that dimension of this. The other thing that I like is this archetypal juxtaposition of what the male does and what the woman does from this classical sexist archetypal viewpoint. This no longer holds in our society because women have broken out of all these traditional roles. But the tradition was, up until about the middle of the 20th century, that the male does, the woman is. The woman is not clothed here, or is barely clothed. The man is fully clothed. And that's a motif that goes all the way back to the Paleolithic. And what you see in Paleolithic art are these naked goddess figurines. And every time you see a female, she is represented naked. Usually without a face, and most times without a mouth. That will be important for Gebser, that lack of a mouth, as we'll see. But the emphasis is on her body. She herself is a mythologically complete. She doesn't have to become anything. Every time you see a male in that art, which is very rare to begin with, he's always costumed. He's always shamanically dressed up in a half-animal outfit. So he's become something. He's become this vehicle of bringing the nature energies into society. But the woman is, in this tradition, the woman is pure nature. She is something, the man has to become something. So the woman from this perspective is nature, the man is culture, and this is the way civilization was set up and ran forever, until the 20th century, and women decided they didn't want to put up with that anymore. So we're moving into a whole new world, which Gebser, by the way, will take recognition of in the Perspectival. The new consciousness structure is moving out of patriarchy, not back into matriarchy, as a lot of the New Agers think, but into an integrum, where the male and female energies are in balance. So there's that motif there. And this is from Vesalius, this grisly thing. And Vesalius publishes his textbook in the same year that Copernicus publishes his in 1543. And Vesalius, what's important about him is that he was the first to begin to go out and cut up bodies. Instead of relying on the textbooks of Galen, Galen's textbooks were all based upon carving of pigs and looking at the anatomy in pigs and assuming that the anatomy was close enough to the human anatomy to write textbooks about human anatomy based on animal anatomy, because it was thought to be improper to cut up human bodies. But Vesalius, and Leonardo himself did this, was really the first to sort of question that authority and go out and slice open bodies themselves and find out what's really going on inside there. So he's sort of opening up the space within the body. And this is an image that really is the manifestation of the perspectival consciousness structure. This is our Faustian mentality. This is it, exteriorized, objectified. McLuhan said that technology, every time you get a machine, what you get is an extension of human physiology. The wheel, for example, is simply an amplified foot. It extends the capacity in the foot and amplifies it. The steam engine amplifies the human muscles so that we don't have to depend on slave labor anymore. We can just have these pistons pushing all the machines. And then he says, too, the most important point, however, is that electronic technology, and the computer in particular, represents the exteriorization of the human nervous system. And here what we have is the exteriorization, not so much of a part of the body as of the intellect itself, the Faustian intellect itself, which slices everything apart and analyzes everything. And this is the sort of aggressive mentality that we have directed at the entire world.